you've seen my cosplay of Madeline Pryor, then you probably know how much I love her. Or if you've just heard me talk about her on this channel, I feel like my love of Madeline Pryor, Amanda talking about Madeline Pryor, is just a staple at this point. I love Maddie a lot. And so of course one of the worst things an X-Men could ever do is be terrible to her. How dare you? Like how Scott was with Maddie, creating the initial Inferno event basically single-handedly. When Jean was revealed to have survived the Dark Phoenix saga and not actually be dead, Scott decided to just up and abandon his then wife Maddie, who looked just like Jean by the way, and their newborn son, leaving them in Alaska and returning to his teammates. What's worse, when Maddie questioned him about whether or not he still had feelings for Jean, he could not deny it. Yikes. Is this one of the worst moments that Scott has ever had? Let me know in the comments what some of your favorite awful Scott Summers moments are. There's so many, honestly. I love you, Scott, but sometimes Sentinels are bad. All mutants should know this, but apparently at some point in her character's history, Emma Frost forgot about that. Though to be fair, this point isn't just about Emma and her doing something awful as an X-Men, it's also kind of just about this overall event and how it was executed and how some of it was written. There's some things that I take issue with. And honestly, just the fact that it exists in general is kinda weird. In Inhumans vs X-Men, or IVX as it is often referred to, we see the X-Men take on the Inhumans. Why? Because the Inhumans unknowingly poison mutants with their Terrigen clouds. Turns out Terrigen mists are toxic to mutants and can even, kill them. So what does Emma do? Rather than try to come to an understanding with the Inhumans, she seeks revenge for the death of her beloved Scott Summers, aka Cyclops. Emma goes so far as to create a psionic illusory image of Scott and make it seem as though he is directly killed in a confrontation with Black Bolt, when really Scott was simply accidentally killed by the mists. Instead of resolving the conflict, this of course only amps it up, turning Cyclops into a martyr that Emma can basically use to fuel a war. However, while all of this is awful, Emma crosses a serious line when she has Sentinels created to hunt down and exterminate Inhumans. Ugh. Cyclops' powers are weird, and maybe one of the worst things to happen to him in terms of design was when we tried to explain them, making them honestly somehow even weirder. Most people would likely assume that Scott Summers has lasers for eyes, which might have been true if we hadn't gotten an in-depth explanation on how his powers work. Currently in the comics, Scott's optic blasts actually are tied to energy absorption and manipulation, with Scott absorbing radiant energy from all around him and it being channeled basically straight into or through his eyeballs. Although the rest of his body is somehow immune to its effects, with even his eyelids acting as a sufficient shield for this massive source of energy. One of my favorite moments actually in the animated show is when Rogue takes Scott's powers by giving him mouth to mouth, and then when she doesn't know how to control them and she's like, what do I do here? And Scott's like, just close your eyes. However, even before that was established, Cyclops' powers were actually explained as being portals to another dimension that was filled with unlimited energy. Yeah, that's apparently a thing that was defined for Cyclops' powers as per the entry that he has in the official handbook of the Marvel Universe from 1983. Oh boy. One of the strangest relationships to have ever existed for the X-Men, or at the very least one of the most controversial relationships to have ever existed, was the one between Archangel and Husk. Now, why was it considered so weird? Well, Angel was one of the first ever X-Men, okay, on the original team back in the 1960s. Now, time works weird in comics, I will grant you that, but Husk was known to be the younger sister of Cannonball, who himself was a much later addition to the X-Men, first appearing almost 20 years after Angel on the New Mutants team in 1982. And the New Mutants are supposed to be kind of like the young kind of X-Men team, just consider that. And Husk, Paige Guthrie, his younger sister, appeared 2 years later than that in 1984. She was believed to be in her late teens or early 20s, while Angel, although somewhat ageless obviously because comics, would likely be in his 30s at least, if not older. And it was implied that he was quite a bit older throughout their relationship still. Add in the fact that these two got busy in the sky above the Guthrie family home, and yeah, I think you can see why this feels pretty problematic. And I know what you're gonna say. You're gonna say, Amanda, what about Wolverine? He's super old. Isn't all that weird? Wolverine doesn't age. It is weird, but I don't know, it's less weird because it's kind of part of his power set, okay? Don't at me on that, alright? Wolverine is for some reason a weird loophole. I acknowledge this, you acknowledge this. That's it. Unless we're pairing him with Mary Jane, and then yeah, that is weird. Now sometimes referred to as the Morlock Massacre, back in the day this was more commonly known simply as the Mutant Massacre. This was before massive mutant attacks like Genosha ever happened, which is also what made this even so shocking and so horrible at the time. Although it happened obviously on a smaller scale in comparison to some of the things we've seen today, the Mutant Massacre happened when Mr. Sinister in essence ordered the Morlocks to be eradicated, eliminated. He sent in his team of marauders to handle them and attack, killing many who lived down in the sewers. Now if you're wondering where the X-Men's involvement comes in here, especially if you know the X-Men actively were kind of trying to help the Morlocks here at this time, one of the main people involved in this attack on the marauders at the time was actually Gambit. So yes, while the X-Men were trying to help and even Angel got really badly injured, Gambit was also involved in creating this and making this happen. He'd go on, of course, to become an X-Men and would later have to answer for these crimes. That's how bad they were. They were actually so bad that they kicked Gambit out, so yeah. During the more recent Inferno event, a lot of truths were unearthed about the true allegiances of those who came together to create Krakoa, and just exactly who was behind the whole rise of the mutant island paradise. We already knew the story, but of course not all mutants, in fact not many mutants, did. The truth was that Krakoa was founded by Magneto and Professor X, as well as their ally and friend, long thought dead, Moira McTaggart, who we learned had always been a mutant with reincarnation powers. And we then also learned during the event that Moira, even while helping to build Krakoa, had actually been a villain the whole time, hell-bent on destroying all of mutant kind. Some people love this, some people don't love this, but it was definitely a terrible thing that happened. And, you know, Moira was definitely an ally of the X-Men, so I'm gonna count that. How did we get here? This is a question I sometimes ask myself in regards to the fall of X and the end of the Krakoan era. It's been an interesting journey, friends. We had such remarkable highs during this age, but we've also had some lows too. And while most of it has been good, some of it has been kinda, to be kind, meh. Even from some of my favorite comic book writers, alas. But hey, I'm not going to like everything someone ever writes, right? That's not possible. Well, unless maybe you're Neil Gaiman. But Neil Gaiman was not writing X-Men during this era, which means that, yes, every now and then we're gonna get a weird take that for some of us we're gonna be like, I don't know about that. Case in point, the characterization of Nimrod recently, which some people have been taking issue with. Up to the modern day Inferno event, Nimrod was considered to be a terrifying villain in the comics. In that modern day Inferno, it took everything both Magneto and Charles had to take down this AI enemy, this AI powerhouse. And even then, they were only successful for about a second? More recently, Nimrod has been reduced to a sort of cackling villain in the wings, who is a big buffoonish kind of brute. Case in point when he got himself momentarily disabled by sap. Or rather, amber, that was spat out, I think, by Krakoa. What is happening? Now granted, this next one happened as a result of the Avengers vs. X-Men event, also referred to as AVX. Cyclops ended up killing Professor X because he was possessed by the Phoenix Force. Not really entirely his fault, and ultimately he just had so much power that it corrupted him. But this was also not a great time for Professor X in comic book history. So even if you disagree with Cyclops' actions here and you think, yeah, this is one of the worst things ever, I think you can at least understand why it happened. This awful and tragic moment happened following a time when many dark truths about Xavier and his lies to the X-Men were revealed. Professor X is known for being one of the greatest heroes in comics. He is often celebrated as the man behind the X-Men, the one that brought them together, that forged this amazing team. Without him, the team, simply put, would not exist. So how could he have ever done something bad? How is this possible? Well, the problem with Professor X is that in a way, he and Magneto actually aren't all that different. They might be on different sides of the spectrum when it comes to their beliefs and their politics, but objectively, they're also kind of the same, in the sense that they are both pretty extreme. They're both extremists, I would say, and when it comes to Professor X, there is definitely a darker side to him that he harbors and often hides away, which also often works against him. This often comes out in the way he chooses to manipulate and alter people's minds though. We've seen the results of his tampering in a very bad way when it comes to multiple characters, including Jean, Scott, and, worst of all, Magneto. Messing with Magneto's mind ultimately created the nigh unstoppable force that was Onslaught, so thanks for that, Professor X. Professor X's initial feelings about Jean back in the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby days of the X-Men were Something else. We all know that Cyclops, aka Scott Summers, has always had a thing for Jean. We also know that Wolverine has, but when it comes to the classic X-Men team, Scott was not the only one. Pretty much everyone was kinda head over heels for Jean at one point, maybe except Bobby, who back in the day liked to flirt but was honestly more in love with ice cream, I would say, than anyone. Even Charles Xavier, Jean's mentor and teacher, was apparently in love with her. Look, Jean was the only female member on the team, so everyone had to be in love with her. Apparently that's how it went. Now, why is it so bad that Professor X was in love with Jean? Well, at the time, it kinda wasn't. The X-Men came across as more young adults than teenagers, so it wasn't like there was like a huge divide there, but in retrospect, it would be established that Charles, as a grown man, had come to Jean's aid when her powers first manifested, when she was implied to be about 8 or 10 years old. Add in the fact that Professor X initially blamed his lack of ability to walk as a reason as to why he couldn't, nay shouldn't, be with Jean, and it's all pretty weird and gross and just in the modern day, you're like, oh no, when you go back and read it.
Starters, Maggot was a disaster of late 90s extremitude. He hails from that miserable period where every new X-Men either A, had the same power as a more famous X-Men except more extreme, or B, had a confusing mutant power that seemed to operate purely according to the whims of plot necessity, or C, had an absolutely ridiculous mutant power that wouldn't be useful ever for anyone. But he falls under category C in my opinion. His stomach was 2 biomech slugs which could eat anything and give him super strength, but he was really conflicted about it and had unnecessary letters in his name. Who in their right mind would want slugs as a part of your body? We left that in the history. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, wasn't he basically the love child of Matter Eater Lad and Spawn? For reference, he was this flamboyant South African mutant who spoke an exaggerated African slang and originally was advertised as one of the strangest X-Men. Yeah. His powers turned him blue and caused him constant pain, which, once again, not helping in the desirable powers category. I don't need pain. He also has one of the worst career arcs out of anybody. He was dumped by the X-Men into Generation X, and then immediately dropped by Generation X after 1 issue into a prison camp. There, well, he was killed by that reality's Iron Man. Bye-bye. With a moniker that's just skin, yeah, this next guy isn't starting off too strong. What's his power? Well, it's pretty simple, 6 feet of extra stretchy skin. Angelo Espinosa was a former gang member from the East LA area who faked his own death for numerous reasons. He wanted to hide his newly manifested mutation from his family, I wonder why, and also he wanted to leave that part of his life behind. He was one of 4 young mutants, including M, Husk, and Blink, who was adopted by the Phalanx, a techno-organic alien race, and why? Well, they wanted to uncover the secret behind mutations. So his power, I really don't want to talk about it, but it's 6 feet of extra flappy skin that he can control, which has got to be hell on wheels to lug around. Like, skin isn't a combat organ. It's so weak against damage that we as a humanity invented armor. It's so weak against nothing that we invented clothes. When your mutant power makes you more vulnerable to injury, you really shouldn't be calling attention to yourself, which is advice Skin didn't take. He was eventually crucified on the lawn of the X-Mansion, and the wrong name was written on his gravestone, and then he was dug up and cremated. That's writing somebody out of continuity with extreme prejudice. Like, even in his depiction when he's just like hanging out, his backpack has unnecessarily scrolled dangly flaps. This guy couldn't win. Beak was intended to show how mutation could look hideous, which isn't a great idea for a good guy in a visual medium. Look, pardon me, I'm a little vain when it comes to my own appearance. So he had all the powers that you would leave off the list if you were designing a human-bird hybrid. Lighter bones made him fragile as all get out. A beak made him, well, hideous. Feathers meant his most powerful mutant attack was tickling, and his wings made him barely able to glide. And that's in a universe where other mutants can fly anytime the writers forget they can't. And they called him Beak, because out of all the words that flash to mind when you see him, well, it's not an awful one. Even the X-Men stuck him in a special class, and sadly in that context, special is a derogatory word. His brightest idea was, get this, attacking Magneto with a metal baseball bat. Yeah. Magneto pretty quickly chucked him up into the air, which granted is sort of a poor strategic decision when you're fighting a bird guy, and Beak sucked so hard he still nearly died. You have a bird guy, and he's almost defeated by being tossed in the air? Come on. And that's still not the most terrible thing he's ever done. No, that was getting his insectoid girlfriend pregnant, because when I saw what the two of them produced, I'm never getting that visual out of my head, and now neither are you. So there was a 1960s comic book character by the name of Captain Marvel. No, not that one. Nope, not the other one. This is one of the half dozen or so who use the same name. Look, I didn't say I was only going to talk about X-Men mutations today. This guy was just so weird that I had to mention him. It's a version you've never heard of. A short-lived character who, upon shouting his magic word, split, could make his body divide into pieces businesses that operated independently. So you can never order a banana split in your life ever again, or offer to split the bill at a restaurant? Yeah, no thanks. He was a jet-booted and laser-eyed alien android powered by an M emblem in medallion who had been sent by Earth by his creators to escape the atomic destruction of their war-ravaged planet. He was published by Myron Fast's short-lived MF Enterprises. And once again, it's unrelated to Fawcett Comics, DC, Marvel. He was only in a couple of comics in the late 60s before legal challenges shut the entire publisher down, and by a few I think he only lasted 4 comics. I wonder why. There have been multiple famines over the years, usually with a variation of the same wasting ability that replicates starvation and makes people weak. Look, maybe this might sound intriguing if you fancy yourself a supervillain, but it sounds miserable and useless to me. And it's strange enough that there are multiple mutants with this power, like where that 2 nickel meme comes into place. But the most interesting and nonsensical variation is the famine of the Final Horsemen, which was an elite team that would only be used if everything else had failed. Specifically, Jeb Lee was a Civil War veteran whose mutant gifts gave him the ability to give people bio-auditory cancer. I can't think of any world where this would be useful. Like, yes, I get it, bad guy, but still! So they were awakened by Clan Aqaba in the present to serve a new child, Apocalypse, and later Apocalypse's heir, an ascended Archangel. Well, after Archangel's defeat, Famine went to work for Genosha, which, okay, but was killed by the Apocalypse twins. Honestly, after that I'm like, geez, should I do a top 10 X-Men with crappy names? Tar Baby had the amazing mutant power of secreting an adhesive all over his body, causing anything he touched to permanently stick to him. By all appearances a nice guy, he just had an unfortunate mutation and name. Now it's hard to tell Baby's ethnicity from looking at his pictures and depictions, but who on earth thought it was a good idea to name any character after a racial slur? I can see where they got the name, but why not flypaper or attachment disorder? Anything's a step up, really. Because like on top of having a crappy, heinous, awful name, being a walking giant glue trap sounds like a miserable existence. He was a Morlock living with the Dream Dwellers. It was a subgroup who survived the mutant massacre. Briefly lived with X-Factor at their headquarters before returning to the tunnels. Now Baby was eventually captured and killed by the Weapon X program at their Neverland facility, and like, just, I never want to hear about Baby ever again. QWERTY had the remarkable power of seeing the future. Now when I say that, I'm sure you're all like, well, I'd love to see the future, what are you talking about? You're speaking crazy, Alexa. Okay, by seeing the future, I mean seeing all possible futures. Every possible future from every possible action every moment of the day. Which basically left her catatonic, because that's so overwhelming. Think about it. Every day you make a million little decisions without even thinking too hard about them. Like, I made the choice to dress like this today. I made the choice to turn on the light this morning. Imagine seeing the future for every choice that's made for every person ever. It would make you want to hide in a secluded cave far, far away from anything living. Like, I'm not talking deserted island, because I think this also translates to wildlife. Thankfully for QWERTY, and I only say this thankfully for her, she was depowered on M-Day, but sadly she passed away because of it. But she did write the Book of Prophecy found by Delphi, and that Masks used to try and start a human mutant war, which is not so good. I do like that her name comes from the arrangement of the first 6 letters found in a computer keyboard though, like that's neat. I don't think it fits her very well, but what do I know? I'm not a comic book writer. Trevor Hawkins was one of the new mutants to manifest their powers after the war between the Avengers and the X-Men, and quickly enrolled in the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning due to being bullied in his public school. Why was he being bullied and harassed? Poor guy was covered in eyes, earning them the oh so creative moniker of Eye Boy. How many eyes? A grand total of 57, which yes, allows him to see in multiple directions, but still. And he's like, yeah, I can't really use them for an offensive purpose, but I can see things that no one else can see, including nearly limitless varieties of spectral visions. So sure, yeah, he's got improved marksmanship, great nonverbal communication skills, apparently he can see dust motes as little plain as day, also he can see really great, really far distances, but is that really worth being covered in so many little ickies that would make anybody with trypophobia run for their lives? Oh, I almost forgot. His many eyes can also see and track pheromone secretions made from specific human beings, which great in battle, super creepy out of battle. So Wraith, well, he could turn his skin invisible, and other people's skin invisible, which that's gonna give you like an ice cream headache. Brain freeze, which by the way, note how I said turn his skin invisible, not turn himself invisible, so you just got like a see-through body, which, ugh. Yes, I get it, turning yourself invisible might be a little too cool for Hector Mendoza, pun intended. He was on his way to a doctor's appointment when a mob attacked him because of his appearance, but was saved by Phoenix, who recruited Hector into a new team of X-Men who was set on a mission to rescue Charles Xavier, who had been kidnapped by Magneto. On the way, Jean Grey was like, let's give you a little crash course in using your powers and how to be an X-Men. So during the fight with Magneto, Hector was able to transfer his invisibility field to Magneto, causing him sufficient disorientation, and everybody else was able to like rescue Xavier, which yay! Now despite his pivotal role in that conflict, Hector decided to leave the X-Men. He wanted to discover and learn his abilities on his own. And poor guy lost his mutant powers during M-Day. How about we end today with another mutation concept that just ticks me off, and that's the Blob. Yeah, early X-Men comics got strange, and this guy fit right in. Red Duke's powers gave him super strength and made him the proverbial unmovable object by controlling gravity around his body. He was also invulnerable and gained mass, becoming morbidly obese. Now, unlike skin, his body possesses a high degree of resistance to injury. The fat tissues that make up the Blob's epidermis are able to absorb the impact of rifle explosives, cannonballs, bazookas, even torpedoes. The fat tissue is resilient enough to revert to its normal shape within seconds after deformation caused by impact, making it virtually impervious to physical injury. The skin can't be punctured or lacerated by most known materials, can't be frostbitten, can't be ravaged by disease, and we have the great elasticity and toughness to thank, which, great. And also the skin cells grow and replace themselves really quickly as well.
Wolverine's life has literally never been easy, not even from day one. He was a child born out of wedlock, and his mom didn't really care for him. In fact, she wasn't around much as she was institutionalized after Wolverine's half-brother died. His biological father, Thomas Logan, wasn't a good person, nor was his other half-brother, Dog Logan. His maternal grandfather was extremely abusive. The only good thing in his life at this point was his friend Rose and John Howlett, his stepfather. But Wolverine is a superhero, which means nothing good ever lasts long. Thomas and Dog killed Wolverine's puppy, leading them to get expelled from the estate. But Thomas did not have it in him to go with Grace. He got drunk and broke into the Howlett mansion with a shotgun. John Howlett tried to protect his wife, but was taken out by Thomas. Young Wolverine witnessed this firsthand, and this was what triggered his mutant abilities for the first time. His claws scarred Dog's face and were the last thing Thomas saw. Wolverine's mother, now terrified, cast him out. The entire ordeal caused so much stress to her already frail mental state, she too ended her life with Thomas's shotgun. Rose fled with Wolverine to BC, where the two did get to experience peace for a bit. Wolverine, though, has the privilege of a healing factor which saves him at least once or twice every storyline. This healing factor is useful, but it can also give him partial amnesia. Traumatic events alter your brain chemistry, so his healing factor patches that up, meaning that he will forget the hard stuff. Rose later died in Logan's arms after a fight went sideways, so he's off to a great start. Wolverine has had quite a long list of ill-fated romances, but he made it as far as an actual wedding with love interest Mariko Yashida. The two fell in love when she visited him in New York, but it wasn't meant to be as she was already betrothed. Wolverine ended up dueling her father, leader of criminal organization Clan Yashida, for her hand. He lost, but it's the thought that counts. They did duel a second time, and Wolverine won that one, and then Wolverine and her were engaged shortly after. Invites were sent out to Wolverine's teammates. Unfortunately, after the X-Men super guests arrived, they were all poisoned by some tea from crime lord Viper. She was also working with the Silver Samurai, who is also Marioko's half-brother. The X-Men are taken to the hospital in critical condition, except for Wolverine, because of his healing factor. The Silver Samurai and Viper send Wolverine on a wild goose chase to get him away from the hospital so they can take out the vulnerable X-Men. Wolverine does make it back in time to save the X-Men. He nearly ends the Silver Samurai, but Viper teleports them out of there. The X-Men all recover and everyone is wedding ready. But Mariko calls it off. The reason? Apparently she no longer thought Wolverine was worthy. We later learned she was just being mind controlled. Doesn't cancel out the heartbreak Wolverine experienced, and we even get to see Wolverine cry in the final panel. Wolverine has been a part of some pretty major historical events, both World Wars, the Prohibition era, and even the Valentine's Day Massacre. This event is a real thing that happened in 1920 Chicago. In our world, there were no survivors from this horrible day, but in the MCU, Wolverine was the only man to make it out alive. Wolverine, now going by Logan, got into some hot water with Al Capone, as Capone controlled Chicago's gang scene, and thus anything illegal coming through, like for example the alcohol Logan was smuggling into the US with his girlfriend. Leading up to Valentine's Day, there were a few fights between Logan and Capone's men, leading to many casualties, including Logan's girlfriend. Her death was what drove Logan to find the famous mob boss. Capone denied having a hand in Logan's girlfriend's death and sent him to the person that did. But surprise, it was just a setup to get Logan to the site of the Valentine's Day Massacre. He almost doesn't make it out, but his healing factor has his back. Wolverine has been captured way too many times to count. This This time, he was being tracked by recurring enemy Victor Creed. Victor found Wolverine unconscious in the middle of a murder scene and snatched him away before the authorities arrived. He took him to the Ravencroft Institute so that scientist Nathaniel Essex could experiment on him. The experiments included a lobotomy, which led to a coma, and a loss of his left arm. To recap, at this point Wolverine has gone from accused of crimes he didn't commit, to kidnapped, to lobotomized, to having his arm cut off. Not a good week so far. One of the doctors, Claudia Russell, freed Wolverine, who is now out of his coma due to his healing factor. The pair was confronted by Victor Creed, and Claudia knew that Wolverine couldn't take a fight with Creed in his state, so she sent him away facing Victor herself. This was a more evenly matched fight than you'd think. Turns out Claudia was a werewolf, and she was the one committing the crimes. She didn't win the fight, but it was enough for Wolverine to get away. It's unclear how his arm came back, but if I had to guess, it was probably the healing factor. It's pretty rare that Wolverine ever fully dies, but one way that has been confirmed to finish the job is drowning. The healing factor requires oxygen, so take that away and Wolverine is done for. It's a fact that has been confirmed in Uncanny X-Force 33 and Wolverine Black, White and Blood issue 4. The serious drowning situation in Uncanny X-Force involved Wolverine, a student of his Evan, and Wolverine's son Daken. Daken has hated Wolverine since he was abandoned by him. Wolverine didn't even know he was born. But Daken is still set on causing Wolverine's demise and doing so while Wolverine watches one of his students get attacked. It's not cute. Eventually though, Wolverine does get saved and he and his son fight it out. His son loses the match after Wolverine holds him face down in a shallow puddle. In Black, White and Blood, Wolverine finds himself in shark-infested waters. He is clearly very set on not drowning, admitting that if he were to pass out from blood loss and sink to the bottom of the ocean, his healing factor would bring him back, just for him to drown again in a continuous, horrifying loop. Until a miracle occurs, of course, and someone drags him above ground. This is one of the only confirmed ways to permanently end Wolverine. Another major historical event Logan had the displeasure of experiencing was the bombing of Hiroshima. I am not kidding. During the Second World War, Logan is captured by soldiers in Japan. He gets his usual treatment of being put in a local prison. He eventually escapes beside Lieutenant Ethan Warren, who will soon become a problem. Logan finds a place to relax for a while with a local girl and they fall in love, but again, good things can't last for him and Lieutenant Warren reappears. The mutant fights Logan's lover, who is a talented swordswoman, but eventually overpowers and ends her. This brings Logan into the fight, but as the two are pummeling each other, a plane is soon overheard overhead. The plane that is carrying the atomic bomb. It destroys the city and injures the two men. Logan's healing factor is working overtime as it now has to regenerate Logan's entire outer skin layer and half his insides. He looks bad, y'all. At this point, two things are consistent for Wolverine. He will be pummeled to near death and his healing factor will ensure that he suffers another day. This was taken to the extreme in Uncanny X-Men Annual number 11. In this comic, Wolverine actually does die. It's a pretty serious fight with the powerful being Horde. Horde wants the Crystal of Ultimate Vision and tasks the X-Men with getting it for him. He wants it because the crystal has life-sustaining powers and grants complete understanding of the universe to whoever uses it. Towards the end of the comic, Wolverine and Horde are battling it out. Wolverine perishes due to a spear to the back, and Horde resolves to take part of Wolverine as his prize. This is ultimately his undoing. Through this action, a drop of Wolverine's blood gets on the crystal, and the power of it literally regenerates Wolverine's being. Normally, his healing factor would not be capable of bringing him back from just a drop of blood. It was the crystal that gave it a power boost, kind of like a Wolverine jump cable. He has the crystal's power flowing through him at this point and uses that to defeat Horde. At this point, Wolverine is basically a god, meaning he can feel every part of the universe and even manipulate it to his will. But the man does have a conscience and realizes that no one should have this level of power. The crystal is now deemed as a threat to the universe and is destroyed by Wolverine, and he lives to suffer another day. Wolverine famously has a thing for Jean Grey. This has led to a lot of emotional and physical pain over the years. New X-Men issue 148 really wanted to destroy this man. Wolverine and Jean Grey are lured to Asteroid M, old headquarters mutant enemy number 1, Magneto. We find that Magneto has spent the last little while creating a plan to destroy the X-Men by preying on their weaknesses. For Wolverine and Jean, they are trapped on this asteroid that is slowly heading towards the sun. The heat and dwindling oxygen make it increasingly difficult for Grey to function, causing her to slowly die. Just before the two enter the sun, Wolverine mercy kills Grey so she won't have to experience being burned up. Wolverine does get to experience this though, as he walks the two of them straight into it. What he doesn't know is that killing her and walking into the sun triggered the Phoenix, which Jean is then able to use to save the pair and transport them down to Earth just in time to save the day. Unfortunately, Wolverine lost her for real in the end, as Magneto shocked her with an extreme amount of power. Wolverine, now feral, ended Magneto right then and there, so Wolverine has to deal with the pain of losing her again, twice, once at his own hand, and is now one of the only few who knows what it's like to be burned up by the sun. In the same issue, we learn that Wolverine was once trapped under a glacier for 6 months. That's already awful. It gets worse because glaciers don't have much to eat in or around or under them, meaning that Wolverine got creative with his healing factor, using it to regrow his skin whenever his hunger took a piece off. He is likely also stuck in a constant state of all-over regeneration for this period. His healing factor is forced to not only regenerate his arm, but also any skin that is being damaged by frostbite, making him immune to the effects of it. It is currently unclear how Wolverine got under the iceberg or how he got out. The Old Man Logan storyline has a reputation for being one of the most heartbreaking Wolverine series, for good reason. One particularly famous moment happened in Wolverine Volume 3, number 70. At this point, America is divided into sections belonging to various villains and villain races. An elderly Logan and Hawkeye, they must travel across this chaotic, now wasteland, to deliver an important parcel. They have to pass the time somehow, and Wolverine chooses to do so by telling Hawkeye about the day he decided to retract his claws for good. In the evening, the X-Mansion suddenly receives dozens of distress calls before being attacked by a group of powerful supervillains. Wolverine desperately tries evacuating all the students while simultaneously fighting. He slowly works his way through every villain until it's just him and Bullseye. But Bullseye's last words are what flips this all on its head. He asks Logan, "Why are you doing this? You're supposed to be our friend." Turns out, Logan wasn't attacking supervillains, but instead his own teammates and friends. Actual supervillain Mysterio appeared after the carnage was over, revealing the true scene to Logan. Logan was extremely distressed and heartbroken by what he did, and spent the next few weeks wandering the forest until finally stopping on some train tracks to end Wolverine once and for all. Wolverine is certainly tough as bone, and I do hope more than anything that this man is able to move to a cabin in the Canadian Rockies for some much needed time off. Changeling, I've talked about this mutant a few times. He is the telepathic shifter that pretended to be Professor X, so Professor X could go underground to prepare for an alien invasion, had an identity crisis, decided to be a good guy after getting a cancer diagnosis, zombie version of him shapeshifted into Elvis to help out She-Hulk in a car chase. Hope that's all ringing a bell. So yeah, normally we talk about his powers, his life story, but today we are talking about his original outfit, because what is he wearing? Blue morph suit base, which is fun because the alternate universe version of him is named Morph. Honestly, the body of it all is fine. It's the helmet. What is that? Who made that? Changeling can change the appearance of his costume at will, and that's what he picked. I have tried to find the reason he wears this helmet, but the truth is the character isn't that popular, so there really isn't much. I did find one hilarious description online. The most interesting thing about you is that ludicrous purple turnip of a hat. Sums it up, methinks. It must have something to do with the fact that he has telepathic powers, but I, for the life of me, cannot figure out what it has to do with that. Sound off in the comments down below if you know what is going on with the purple turnip. Again, with the headpieces for this X-Men, Feral sporting some sky-high hair, or fur. Feral is her name. Love that choice. She's completely feral. I don't know how to feel about her hair, fur, though. It's so pointy and so high. Somehow she is outdoing the original Wolverine look. Her actual clothing follows a similar style to her hair, having very pointy and high shoulders. I feel like she is in a 80s rock band and has yet to reveal that fact. Feral is like an animal. She has sharp claws and teeth. Her mutation makes her very fast, and she has heightened senses. She also has a healing factor, of course, and a tail. The tail is very long and very strong. She can support herself with just the tail should she need to. Her most interesting ability, in my opinion, would have to be intangibility. She gained this ability during her Ghost era. Yes, she did die, like most Marvel characters. As a ghost, she could easily pass through things. I showed a picture of Feral to my roommate. First words out of her mouth, what would that look like in 3D? She has a point. How big is the hair in real life? Ava Dara, or Warbird, is a soldier for the Shi'ar Empire. That means she gets soldier armor because she goes into battle a lot. She is in the army. Not that I really know what going into battle is like, but I watch TV, I read, and you generally want to protect soft parts and major organs in your chest area. Tell me why her entire middle section is completely exposed in a big cross. Nothing there that we can see. Hopefully there's like an invisible shield type of situation she put there to show off, but I really don't think so. Is it a show of power? I'm exposing everything because you will never get close kind of thing? It's poor design in my opinion. Fun design, she looks great, but it's not proper battle armor. The rest of the armor is fine. Her legs, her arm, and her head are good. It's just the heart and major organs that are out. Warbird is a strong fighter, expert markswoman, and very well trained in hand-to-hand combat, plus she has an energy sword, so she is equipped to brawl when she needs to. The Cyclops outfit that debuted right after Avengers X-Men in 2012 was not a favorite in comparison to other Cyclops fits. No, it didn't measure up, but it didn't look completely awful, but it was kind of impractical. There are already so many things you just have to ignore in the Marvel Universe, or you just kind of have to take it at face value, or else you'll find no enjoyment here. But this outfit just makes no sense for the character. So usually Cyclops wears a visor to help prevent random like optic blasts. The good thing about the visor is that it makes sense. If he needs to remove it, he can do so easily. It makes sense that something could be built into the visor to prevent the random optic blasts. So when the new fit dropped in 2012, there were a lot of questions. The suit itself is forgettable but fine, just a red suit with lines on it. It's the head section that is weird, again with the helmets and heads and masks. So instead of a visor, he just has an X across the eyes. Not sure what the X is made of, presumably fabric, but then what fabric is going to prevent optic blasts? Maybe it's made of a hard material to prevent optic blasts, then if he needed to remove it, would he just need to take off his entire hood? Questions everywhere. This one loses points simply for being unrealistic to the universe, which is hard to achieve. Magneto has had a number of outfits over the year, and I have put this one in the middle because I can't decide if I hate it. In 2021, Marvel released a bunch of character designs for the Hellfire Gala. It was the Met Gala for mutants basically, so everyone is turning up in exaggerated versions of their usual outfits or something representing their powers. Some people hit it out of the park. Emma Frost, Colossus, Sunfire are some of my personal favorites. Magneto's is giving. We can't deny that he put his all into his outfit. He's like an Elton John steampunk Magneto. There are aspects I really like. His gold cane is his helmet, and the suit is fun. It has lots of intricate designs and a rose pinned to the collar. Most of my problem, my side eye, is directed at the top hat. I don't think I've seen someone wear a top hat well since like 1900 or a magician. Yeah, I just can't decide if he looks majestic or too over the top. Let me know what you think. Nightcrawler slays right now. He's got a good look going for him. His look in the 90s Excalibur era, not a fan favorite, and it's not hard to see why. Nightcrawler now is like this cool guy. Sure, can his red neck cape be drawn a little extreme? Yes, but he makes it look cool. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for his 90s choice of fashion. Lots of characters got bold redesigns in the 90s, some worked, some didn't. In Nightcrawler's case, they gave him a goatee and overall made him a pirate. He looks like a pirate. Give him the hat, that's a pirate. He has a little gold earring, that's not that bad. I feel like they could bring that back no problem. His belt is weird though. It looks like it might actually be undergarments. I don't know. The red V that we are used to seeing on the character, but made out of this like loose piece of fabric. It looks like he got into an accident in the sheets section of Bed Bath & Beyond. Generally, fans agree that this redesign was a miss and are glad he has a different fit now. Wolverine's debut costume, the one that was basically the yellow and blue standard but had little whiskers, that one surprisingly isn't the worst thing Wolverine has worn. Maybe the worst thing designed for him, but he has served worse. In X-Men 107, Wolverine is fighting the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard wears these outfits that are great for them, sure, but not so great for Wolverine. They're like these brown skin suits with a dark brown stripe up the middle and a belt made out of bones. Sounds like it should slay, right? The thing is, when Wolverine is drawn far away, it looks like he is wearing nothing but a thick ribbon. Physics, we don't know her. He's not, of course. The reason he had to wear the suit in the first place was because he got burned up in the fight and he needed something to wear that wasn't fabric shreds. An Imperial Guard was nearby and Wolverine took him out and wore his clothes. Professor X has sported some looks over the years. This one has got a touch of whimsy, a little bit of magic, and one man looking pretty in pink. Uncanny X-Men 153 gave us the gift of Pink Wizard Professor X. Unexpected turn for him, of course, but he didn't actually wear it. This issue of Uncanny X-Men featured the X-Men cleaning up after an attack, and Colossus's younger sister was scared to sleep because of the attack. So Kitty tells her a story to help her sleep. That story was Kitty's fairy tale. It featured Kitty and Colossus as pirates, Cyclops and Jean Grey as the prince and princess, Storm as the genie, Nightcrawler as a bamf, Wolverine as an unnamed meanie, and Professor X as the wizard. Professor X as the wizard was a moment. The comic was a little racially insensitive, but not the worst I've seen from Marvel, but also like not amazing. So Pink Professor is sitting on a magic carpet, and he's got this hot pink robe covered in white stars and moons. He has a true wizard hat on his head with a little gem right in the middle and a very long mustache. Everyone across the board is sporting slightly goofy looks. This one was just the most shocking to me. So Rogue and the color green are best friends. She looks great in green, but once they made her green, like Shrek green, why? This was in Uncanny X-Men 190 and 191. This story was about that time that New York was transported back to the Middle Ages because a wizard couldn't get tickets to a Renaissance fair. I'm kidding. Kulan Gath is just weird. He made it so everyone in NYC acted like and believed they were in the Middle Ages and dressed like it was the Middle Ages, except Spider-Man. Not about him though. This is about what they did to Rogue. Redheads in green is a moment, you know, with the color wheel, backed science, and everything. So when Rogue wears green, she looks great. When she is green, I don't know. Shrek was not out when this comic was released, but Rogue is Shrek here. She doesn't look awful, but she's looked better. She also just wears a tunic and a long cape. She wasn't always green. In certain panels she has her regular skin tone, so I'm not sure what's going on. It's kind of funny because at the start of the comic there is a panel that showcases all the heroes affected by the spell. In it you can see Storm drawn like a goddess, flattering angles overall, and then Rogue is beside her looking so angry and square. What did they do to my girl? Uncanny X-Men 149 and Kitty Pryde, match made not in heaven. It is sweet how the costume from this issue came to be. Kitty is young, she wants to express herself, right? So she decided that the X-Men costume given to her was positively antique. So she decided to make herself a new one. This comic came out in the 80s, so I think you can guess how this teenage girl designed an 80s superhero costume and how it turned out. Lots of colors that don't go together and some stars. She also added some rollerblades to the mix, a nod to Dazzler, who Kitty is a fan of. They are a fun touch. Now instead of the flare coming from her ability to walk through walls, she can rollerblade through them. She's got these purple, white, and blue high sock stocking things, and I think a gold base suit. On top of that, she's wearing green shorts, a purple X-Men belt, orange gloves, purple mask, and a red tank top with blue lightning strikes on it. The gloves also have blue stars on them. I was not a teen girl in the 80s personally, so I'm not sure if this was like the dream fit. If you were a teen girl in the 80s, please sound off in the comments. Let me know if you would wear this to the roller rink. Nightcrawler's origin is a mess that has hopefully been cleaned up for the last time. As it stands right now, Nightcrawler's mother is Destiny and his father is Mystique. Yes, Mystique presents as a woman most of the time, I get that, but this is the MCU that can be easily changed depending on the mutant. Mystique is a very powerful mutant and she isn't a shapeshifter. Well, she is. I'm just trying to be dramatic and make a point. Mystique is a gene shaper. Shape-shifting commonly is changing your body's shape but keeping your inside stuff like your DNA the same. For Mystique, she can alter her inside stuff, so she was able to give herself functioning male reproductive organs and become a father. For the longest time, Nightcrawler's mom was Mystique and his dad was Azazel. Turns out Mystique had relations with Azazel that didn't result in a child, but the relationship made sure she was familiar with Azazel's body so she could easily replicate it when she needed to. Plus, Azazel thinking Nightcrawler was his son was crucial to him not messing with the Earth to the point of destruction because, well, he might not be a great father, but at least he doesn't want to destroy his kid's home planet. Nightcrawler has a lot of parents. Covered here, Mystique, Destiny, and Azazel, but also Mystique was married to Baron Wagner and he thought that Nightcrawler was his, so that's another maybe like half father. Then as covered in part 1, Mystique married Professor X at one point, so that's a stepdad right there. It looks like this whole Destiny and Mystique thing might be the permanent birth story for Nightcrawler, as that's what the original creator intended, but like all things in the Marvel Universe, we just have to wait and see. At this point, Wolverine could write a handbook on retcons and how to come back from the dead. He has everything going for him to not die, indestructible skeleton, powerful healing factor, but sometimes even that isn't enough. But Wolverine is so popular, so you can't kill him. So how is it that he never seems to stay 6 feet under? Well, he travels 6 million feet under and fights the Angel of Death in Purgatory for the right to come back to life. That is so heavy metal. This new info came about in 2008 in Wolverine 48 and was expanded on in Wolverine 58. The issue before this one ends with Wolverine brain dead after a fight that ended up with a bomb on the inside of his body, and the death of his girlfriend, not Silver Fox. This was a different girlfriend way later than that. Like how it happened with Silver Fox, we'll get into later, his girlfriend's passing emotionally destroyed him and his will to live. So when the time came to fight again, Wolverine didn't wanna, which is why he wasn't waking up on Earth. Eventually though, through a series of deaths and deals, Wolverine clawed his way back to the surface. Overall, this retcon is not the worst of this list. It's a pretty good explanation as to why Wolverine is always coming back even if he's been hit with something serious. Surprise! The Phoenix Force is Thor's mom. That's right, the one that X-Men Jean Grey is connected to. That has now been sort of retconned, and Thor is once again son of Gaia, or Gaia, depends on the person how you want to say it. Though we know that Mother Earth is Thor's biological mom now, there was a moment when we were meant to believe it was the Phoenix Force. The Force claimed Thor as her own, and that left everyone shocked, surprised, flabbergasted. At the time, it was like, why did we need that? Now it's kinda like, there are worse things. So the bold statement of Thor, I am your mother, was taken back, but when Thor was a baby, just after Mother Earth had given birth to him, Thor was attacked by a frost giant sword and it literally froze baby Thor. So friend to Mother Earth, the Phoenix Force breathed fire into the child, the fire of life, and now he's okay and has some Phoenix power in him. And he kind of has 3 moms now: Mother Earth, the Phoenix Force, and Freya. Wolverine cannot know peace or anything that has happened in his past. Even we the readers don't know what's real or what's retconnable. Take Wolverine's ex, Silver Fox. Now we're getting to her. Like most people close to Wolverine, she passed away in a brutal manner, and it was very sad and very hard on Wolverine. She met an untimely end at the hands of Sabretooth, Wolverine's arch nemesis. This death was actually one of the main reasons the pair hated each other so much. So Silver Fox's death was a very big deal until she was retcon revived, not even just as herself, but as a Hydra agent. That's an emotional hit. We learned Wolverine's tragic memories of her death were fake. There was even a fake cabin he was shown to prove it, but then we got the rug pulled again, and this whole thing was retconned again in House of M. Wolverine regains the memory of Silver Fox and Sabretooth. It's real this time. For how long though? I guess we'll never know. The Silver Fox that is a Hydra agent is thought to have been an impersonator or clone, or who knows. One of Wolverine's retcons was so controversial that it never actually panned out. Rumor has it that Wolverine was at one point maybe not a mutant, but really a Wolverine. A Wolverine that had been turned into a human. It's not hard to see why this one didn't make it to the page and why the rumor is hated. It's fun to think about, but it definitely doesn't have the same cool factor that Mutant Wolverine does. If the Wolverine had made it to the page, the idea was that the High Evolutionary would have created him. One of Wolverine's original writers has denied that this Wolverine nonsense was his idea, though he did admit that bringing the High Evolutionary into Wolverine's origin was something that was planned. I'm glad we have the Wolverine we do, and that for the most part he seems to always come back to his mutant status. I am counting this one because the X-Men are heavily involved. Franklin Richards is the son of Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman, and he has been having a bit of an identity crisis, but this isn't the one most teenagers go through. No, his is much worse. He thought he was a mutant and even got onto the exclusive mutant island and made a bunch of friends, only to later discover he wasn't a mutant at all. He was a very powerful kid, just not a powerful mutant kid. Franklin was accidentally making himself appear as a mutant, and when his power got drained, he couldn't do that anymore, and that was when the non-mutant status was discovered. This one sucks because there was so much now unnecessary fighting that happened to get Franklin onto Krakoa. His dad permanently damaged his relationship with Franklin, preventing him from going to Krakoa by masking his X gene. The X-Men and the Fantastic Four destroyed Washington Park. Franklin makes all of his mutant friends, and all of it ends up being for nothing. Hard enough to keep up with as a reader, imagine that being your teenage years. Franklin was considered one of the strongest mutants ever until this big old mess happened, and he's not anymore. more. This next retcon seems to be a love it or hate it situation. I think it's neat, but a lot of people dislike it for not making a lot of sense in the X-Men universe. Moira McTaggart being a mutant and not a human. Her mutant ability is reincarnation, but the cool kind. Instead of just being reincarnated and needing to start all over again every time, she keeps all her memories and everything she has learned. I think this is neat and explains why she is so smart. But in the 90s, there was that big virus thing, the legacy virus, and Moira was the first human to get it. That was a big deal. Before her, only mutants were affected by the virus. She developed a mutated strain when she got sick. This is important because before, humans were not chill with mutants, but they weren't overly hostile either. Once they learned they could catch the legacy virus, humans got a bit unhinged. Chaos ensued, there was anti-mutant riots, it wasn't cute. That would cause a lot of guilt if she were a human that caused this, but how much guilt is she feeling since now she is a mutant that lied and caused all this just to save herself from being found out? Plus, she gave a sample of the mutated virus. She literally provided a sample, and that sample was studied by great academic minds in detail, and no one clocked that they were looking at mutant DNA. Personally, I'm not a science person in our world, so I am hanging on by a thread when it comes to the MCU, but I feel like that is something that they would have or should have checked in their extensive research. Every once in a while, Marvel does this thing where they take a character that has been a mutant since creation and they suddenly take the mutant status away for whatever reason. Then they're like, how do you feel about that? And we all say we hate it, and 50% of the time it gets fixed. Thankfully, they fixed Wolverine's lupine era. Wolverine had been a mutant basically for as long as we've had him. That all changed in 2007 around issue 50 of Wolverine Volume 3. All of a sudden, Wolverine was not a mutant, he was a lupine, a human descended from wolves. Wolverine was told this by ancient evil Romulus and didn't take it well. Good news is, neither did Wolverine fans. The retcon was received so poorly, Marvel did a double retcon to fix it. In the later comic Wolverine Volume 2 number 312, Romulus' sister Remus ended up literally telling Wolverine that everything her brother said wasn't true and the lupine species was not actually real. There we go. He is out of his lupine era, dead and gone and buried. Okay, listen. This retcon is not the case anymore, but it did happen. At one point, Magneto was actually not Jewish. When he was being investigated by Sabra and everything was found out that the name Eric L was fake, there were hints that Magneto was not Jewish and instead he and his wife were Romani. This didn't go over well with fans as we were all kind of used to Magneto being Jewish, and pretty soon it was permanently cemented that Magneto was Jewish when he got his actual fleshed out backstory. So now he is definitely Jewish, can't see that changing, but that wasn't always the case in the 90s. Wanda and Pietro are still rocking the boat all these years later, and it is one of the X-Men's most hated retcons ever. Wanda and Pietro are not Magneto's twins. Magneto, you are not the father. This retcon is hated for a variety of reasons, like how the overall story is now messed up, but also many think it had a real world reason for happening. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver made their MCU debut and were going to become major players. Unfortunately, they were already tied to a separate studio. The battle between studios is what many think is the reason Marvel cut the tie between Magneto and the twins so they could be used in the films without ties to the not yet owned X-Men. People like their favorite characters to have a story that makes sense, with decisions made for them that fit in with the rest of the story, not because of a legal battle in the real world. One thing I really want to know because of all of this is if Wanda and Pietro are not Magneto's twins, then who are? We know the babies were born, they were delivered by an evolved cow, that's not something one forgets. Wanda and Pietro found out they weren't related to Magneto almost a decade ago. What happened to Magneto's biological twins? I literally can't find anything on it. Please someone let me know the answer. If you have it, comment down below. It's just a little weird that Marvel hasn't explored that since it's been almost a decade since Wanda and Pietro discovered their father wasn't their father. Maybe they're leaving it open so that they can bring them back in once the X-Men make it to the MCU. I don't know.
We're starting off our list light with a bit of a silly little retcon that seemed to be entirely pointless. Chris Claremont's run on the New Mutants is praised for its awesome character work and the cool locations the team goes to. For example, we got the introduction of the character Magma, who came from the long-forgotten Roman colony known as Nova Roma. Nova Roma was super cool because it was a society that had changed very little since the days of the Roman Empire. However, after Chris left, X-Men villain Selene changed that. Also hailing from Nova Roma, Selene revealed that she had in reality brainwashed everyone into thinking that Nova Roma was real, while the whole thing was just a big, dumb, elaborate hoax. However, like a boss, when Chris Claremont later returned to the X-Books, he changed things again so that the hoax was part of another bigger hoax instead, and he made it so Nova Roma was back to what he originally had created. Now, I kind of like this next retcon, but there is no denying it does Professor X pretty dirty. Yeah, we are talking about Deadly Genesis. Professor X assembled the all-new, all-different X-Men after the Krakoan attack on the original X-Men. Cyclops was the key survivor of that attack, and he escaped, found Xavier, and requested additional aid. From there, Xavier recruited Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, etc. as his all-new X-Men. However, there was another. Professor X had actually made up an entirely different team which included Cyclops' long-lost brother, Vulcan, and he sent them on the rescue mission way underprepared with no real experience before he sent his new X-Men team. That entire team was decimated. That's bad enough for Xavier, but then you take into account that Professor X then mind-wiped Cyclops of the events and covered it all up. It made the character of Professor Xavier far less heroic than traditionally perceived. It also brought about an entirely new cast of characters and gave Cyclops even more reason to become just a smidge bit more unhinged. But morally dubious Professor Xavier kinda works really well. I like it. The Decimation. It's a huge event in the X-Men canon. This is when the Scarlet Witch wished away the X gene completely when she said no more mutants, and the next decade of X-Men comics centered on that decision. With just 198 mutants left and no more mutants being born anymore, mutants were on the edge of extinction. Obviously, the mutants absolutely hated Wanda for this, and for good reason, but alas, all was not as it seemed. The Scarlet Witch's involvement was soon altered in Avengers: The Children's Crusade, as the X-Men discovered that Victor Von Doom was secretly behind the decimation. Sure, the X-Men still hated the Scarlet Witch for a long time after, again, rightfully so, but the comics removed some of her blame for the situation. It was a serious change given how important the decimation was for the X-Men. The Dark Phoenix saga was landmark. That story set the precedent that even longtime X-Men, some of the most loved characters, weren't beyond being corrupted and turned into the bad guy. Not only that, but they could also cause problems for the entire galaxy and wipe out countless lives. We saw Jean Grey get overcome by the Phoenix Force's power, attack her friends, and destroy a world before sacrificing herself to save everyone. Yes, well, not really. Before long, the X-Men comics revealed Jean was actually chilling out in a cocoon at the bottom of Jamaica Bay. That Jean Grey that did all those incredibly horrible things? That Jeannie McBeanie? That wasn't Jean at all. Instead, it was revealed that it was actually the Phoenix Force which had taken on the physical form of Jean Grey. The real Jean never did the horrible things the Phoenix did. On one hand, we got Jean Grey back. On the other hand, the change completely uprooted the Dark Phoenix's sagas, message, and legacy, which ticked off a lot of fans. Next up on our list is, kind of a weird one. Bit of a strange fellow. It's also incredibly small in the grand scheme of things. Oh, and it's also 100% unnecessary and just weird and was done purely for shock factor storytelling. Sentry Fallen Sun is a comic that depicts the funeral for the Sentry after he was taken down by Thor during the Siege event. A whole bunch of superheroes are at his funeral. The Fantastic Four, Daredevil, Tony Stark, Cyclops, Rogue, and Emma Frost, Doctor Strange, they are all giving their thoughts and prayers saying nice things about Sentry. Thor even goes and dances with Sentry's mom. It's wholesome. But then we have Rogue. Rogue tries to say her piece. She talks about how she went for a long time without being able to touch somebody, except for the Sentry, who was the only person who could hug her. And then she gets overwhelmed and runs off crying. And then, in a little under the breath moment between Johnny Storm and Cyclops, it's basically implied that Rogue and Sentry had, they did the thing. It's just so random and so unnecessary and really out of place. Speaking of random, unnecessary, out of place, and romance, following the untimely passing of Professor Charles Xavier at the hands of his own golden boy Cyclops, who was possessed by the Phoenix Force during the Avengers vs. X-Men event, Xavier's last will and testament are read out by Jennifer Walters' She-Hulk to a room full of mourning listeners. In Uncanny X-Men number 24, fittingly titled The Last Will and Testament of Charles Xavier, Jen reveals to the room of At Odds X-Men that at some point in Xavier's past, he not just loved, but actually married Raven Darkholme, better known as Mystique. As you can imagine, almost every single person in that room was shocked and confused. He then went on to tell them about the most powerful mutant any of them had ever seen, and they had to go deal with that. But Professor X married Mystique, so I guess that kind of makes him Nightcrawler's stepdaddy, which is weird. Speaking of which, it's common knowledge to most readers by now that Nightcrawler is the son of Mystique, something that was revealed and confirmed ages ago in 1994. To cut the story short, Mystique was posing as a German woman and became the wife of a very wealthy and regular human man. After giving birth to a very much not normal human mutant child in the form of Nightcrawler and exposing herself as a mutant during labor, she ran away, abandoning baby Nightcrawler. It was later revealed that Kurt's odd appearance wasn't just due to Mystique being another blue mutant, but was actually due to his real father, which by the way was not the human man. Kurt's biological father is actually Azazel, a member of an interdimensional group of ancient demon-like mutants. To maintain his presence on Earth, Azazel basically makes babies every few years. The children are then used as anchors to keep him aligned to our world. This retcon changed Nightcrawler's origin, sure, but it also gave him a ton of siblings, and it also, inexplicably, changed another X-Men as well, Angel. Angel was now a descendant of an equally ancient offshoot of mutants, but instead of having a demonic appearance, they possessed angelic qualities. Oh, so cool. I hate it. Now personally, I am a fan of this next retcon. So after having the adamantium forcibly ripped out of his body by Magneto in X-Men number 25 volume 2, Wolverine came to learn that his claws were actually made of bone and are a part of his mutation. This revelation came alongside a whole bunch of other things that the traumatic events had on Logan, but funnily enough, this small little fact of his claws being natural was large enough to blow a hole in several Wolverine stories where he specifically talks about not having claws before getting involved with the Weapon X program. In the past, there were actual panels of Wolverine having his adamantium bonded to his skeleton, and it was heavily implied that the claws were implanted alongside all of it. Now of course, Marvel waved this off with the unreliability of his fragmented memories, but funnily enough, it started a whole thing of uncovering Wolverine's past, which led to him being well over 100 years old, having his real name be James Howlett, not Logan, as he thought it was. So it's not entirely negative, but it's actually, there's no negatives here. From the day of Lucas Bishop's debut in Uncanny X-Men, he was a good guy. Righteous, self-sacrificing, a literal man of the law from the future. He had a huge degree of integrity, and unlike a lot of other characters, he never seemed to waver on that, which is why, when we saw his sudden and drastic change to brutal villainy, most fans were left flabbergasted even if the explanation was clear and out in the open. Now we knew that Bishop came to the main 616 timeline to stop what was commonly referred to as the X-Traitor. At first he thought it was Gambit, then after Onslaught he thought maybe it was Xavier, but then 10 years later, after having never mentioned her or anything like her before, Bishop decided once and for all that it was actually the first baby born since M-Day, Hope Summers. The child would soon be adopted by Cable, and Bishop set out to send the sweet fresh mutant back to the Shadow Realm. Bishop nearly took the life of Professor X, someone he committed to protecting, and he slaughtered the entire population of a future version of Earth just to cut down on the places that Cable and Hope could run to. The Messiah story arc was honestly loved by so many people, it's kind of super awesome, but the heel turn in Bishop's personality was then explained away as being him being possessed by a demon bear. What does that even mean? Now last up for the day, after Cassandra Nova, the insanely powerful twin of Professor X, leveled the mutant city of Genosha, Magneto was nowhere to be found, and thus he was presumed to have bit the dust in the attack. But then the new X-Men member, Zorn, revealed that he was actually Magneto in disguise. Whoa, crazy, cool. What's not so cool was that upon the reveal, Magneto destroyed the X-Mansion and attacked New York City, taking a lot of people's lives and making a lot more people his prisoners. Now, obviously, the X-Men eventually triumph, but not before Magneto fatally injures Jean Grey with a, quote, planetary scale stroke. It's stupid, but for that crime, Wolverine relieved Magneto of his head. So that's Magneto gone for good, right? Nuh-uh-uh. Once the writer of the story, Grant Morrison, finished his run, Marvel brought both Magneto and Zorn back, and even revealed that there was actually two Zorns. The Zorn that the X-Men had come to know wasn't actually Magneto at all, but an imposter, and the new Zorn was that one's brother. So, Magneto was cleared of wiping out hundreds of thousands of people this one time, and that made it okay for the supervillain to become one of the X-Men. It's probably common knowledge to most readers by now that Nightcrawler is the son of Mystique, something that was revealed and confirmed ages ago in 1994. Now, to cut the story short, Mystique was posing as a German woman and became the wife of a very wealthy and regular human man. After giving birth to a very much not normal human mutant child in the form of a Nightcrawler, she ran away, abandoning baby Nightcrawler. It was later revealed that Kurt's odd appearance wasn't just due to Mystique being another blue mutant, but it was actually due to his real father, which was not the human man. Kurt's biological father was actually Azazel, a member of an interdimensional group of ancient demon-like mutants. But oh no, not actually. Never mind anyone who had been believing that, since it was revealed in X-Men Blue Origins issue 1 that Nightcrawler is actually the son of both Mystique, taking the form of a man, and her longtime lover, Destiny. While this is a weird retcon that a lot of people hated, it was actually the original plan of Chris Claremont, so it's actually kind of a win. If any of y'all watched X-Men 97, if you haven't, then I suggest maybe you just skip ahead to the next point in this video because we are talking about X-Men 97. Okay, so basically, episode 5. Holy hell. Basically, Cable shows up to warn everyone about a pending attack on Genosha, which happens about 10 seconds later, when an absolutely giant sentinel shows up and starts decimating everyone. Every mutant it sees. Genosha, which was celebrating its new inclusion into the UN, is absolutely decimated. This is echoing an earlier comic book storyline, so it's not like this is completely new, but this event is different in a key way. Magneto shields a bunch of mutants he previously promised to protect and seemingly gets wiped out by his Sentinel Blast. Then Rogue, in like a blind rage, attempts to take it down by herself, but is knocked out of the way by Gambit, who then goes after the thing himself. He ends up being skewered, but manages to energize the entire Sentinel, blowing it up, along with himself, saving the whole of Genosha almost single-handedly. It's awesome, but brutal. In the new golden Krakoa age of mutant kind in Marvel Comics, all mutants, good and bad, have been given a fresh start on Krakoa. Now, some people never change, but one that had seemed to have turned over a new leaf is the mutant geneticist Mr. Sinister, even finding himself on the mutant leading council. Well, who would have thought that a guy named Mr. Sinister would ever betray his allies? Mr. Sinister finds a way to give himself control over the entire mutant population using the mutant resurrection protocols to essentially brainwash and control everyone. Or almost everyone. Mr. Sinister's ways push the Marvel Universe into a dystopian timeline, one that we get to see play out over the span of 3 different eras: Year 10, Year 100, and Year 1000. But what happens within those 1000 years is even crazier, with mutant chimeras spliced together with multiple different mutant powers, a whole religion of Nightcrawler clones, and the Juggernaut who goes hurtling through space for 1000 years until being used as a bullet to wipe out Thanos. The whole story is awesome to read, but Sinister taking over the X-Men is certainly no bueno. While Sins of Sinister was cool, it took place before the legit fall of the nation of Krakoa, the fall of the House of X, and it kicked off in spectacular fashion. During this year's annual mutant celebration, the Hellfire Gala, literally on the very next page following a new X-Men team being finally announced, out of nowhere the anti-mutant organization known as Orchis attacks the gala, with Nimrod coming crashing down from the thermosphere at terminal velocity. He completely obliterates Dazzler, Frenzy, Cannonball, and Prodigy, and then punches Jubilee into the ground, wiping out 5 of the 8 new X-Men before he managed to decimate Bobby Drake Iceman, another Omega level mutant. It was an absolute massacre and one of the most harrowing, shocking things I have seen in an X-Men comic in a hot minute. Now, after the attack of Nimrod, the forces of Orchis come pouring into Krakoa through the Krakoan gates, which were hacked by Dr. Stasis. These forces, backed up by Stark Tech Sentinels, start laying waste to the mutants. However, midway through this fight, Jean Grey uses her powers as one of the most powerful telepaths on the planet, essentially freezing everyone. She overrides everyone's minds and says that everyone who is an ally of the X-Men can stay, and everyone who is against the X-Men is free to go, otherwise she will destroy their minds. But in that moment, Dr. Stasis says, "It's now or never, friend," and Moira McTaggart, going by Moira X and working with Orchis, literally plunges a knife into Jean's back, taking her life on the spot. Now, a little bit before that actually happened, Dr. Stasis, a clone of Mr. Sinister, showed up and revealed to Professor X that the medicine that the X-Men had been producing for the world, which is what led Krakoa to becoming a world power, have all been tampered with, and Stasis can now control or wipe out any human who used any of the medicine produced by the X-Men. Now, in exchange for him agreeing to not do that, and following the passing of Jean Grey with Moira grabbing Charles and holding the same knife at his throat, Charles surrenders and agrees to use his powers to force the mutant population of Krakoa, some 200,000 strong, to go through teleportation gates to the X-Men's home on Arakko, aka Mars. Now, Orchis planned on having Arakko being its next target, but instead, something went horribly wrong, and those 200,000 mutants were suddenly transported to the White Hot Room, essentially the afterlife and the base of operations for the Phoenix Force. Now, with Orchis attacking the mutant population and essentially wiping out tons of mutants, and the newest team of X-Men, to usher in the fall of X, the mutant population are now on the run and in hiding. We have Kitty Pryde as essentially an assassin running around wiping out Orchis soldiers and running ops. Firestar was basically placed as a double agent inside of Orchis, and many mutants have been captured by the anti-mutant group. One of the key ones being the field leader of the X-Men, Cyclops. Now, when I tell you that Orchis has done some horrible things to Cyclops, I am not joking. Keeping him locked up, Orchis have strapped Cyclops to a big old X, which is attached to sensors that will blow the entire thing up if he is removed. But on top of that, they've essentially deactivated his powers by literally stapling his eyelids shut. It's one of the most gruesome things I have ever seen. They've essentially been holding this guy hostage and interrogating him, and he has staples on his eyelids. But it's not as messed up as anything that Sabretooth does to Wolverine. Sabretooth and Wolverine have been on two sides of a feud that has been going on for a long time in Marvel Comics. During the Krakoan era, Sabretooth was essentially banished to a pit inside of Krakoa, where he was essentially trapped in his own mind, unable to escape. Sabretooth actually learned how to turn this mindscape into his own personal playground, and eventually he even managed to escape and amass both power and an army of multiversal versions of himself. It seemingly all was for the purpose of tormenting Wolverine, which comes to a head in this era's volume of Wolverine during the fall of X. Now, just to give you some quick highlights of what happens here, Sabretooth is able to attack Wolverine and his team of mutants who are hiding away. He and his army of other Sabretooths decimate this team and Wolverine's entire family. He captures Quentin Quire's head in a box, he takes away Wolverine's powers and makes the guy relive his past traumas. It's just messed up, man. So basically, as part of this whole Fall of X thing, while Orchis was initially the main threat posed to the X-Men as the conflict went on, the artificial intelligence Sentinel created by Orchis, Nimrod, has shifted to become the main threat for the X-Men towards the end of the fall of the House of X. Nimrod's main goal is essentially to become a Dominion. Basically, in Marvel, a Dominion is what happens when an AI manages to learn everything there is to learn about every form of power that exists, from magic to mutants to cosmic power. And then that AI essentially becomes a god. But in that pursuit for Dominion, Nimrod becomes even more of a major threat to the X-Men, with his ability to adapt to anything the mutants throw at him, he's able to hold his own with lethal effectiveness. He's able to take on Rogue and Colossus at the same time, two incredible powerhouses. Now while Nimrod was attempting to achieve dominion, in issue number 4 of the event, Professor X basically betrays literally everyone and makes a backdoor deal with Nimrod. Professor X's whole goal during this era of Marvel's mutants was to create a safe haven for mutants, with Nimrod now setting his sights on grander goals than destroying all of mutantdom. Professor X tries to make a deal where the mutants will not try to interfere with Nimrod's plans as long as Nimrod promises to spare them and let them continue living on the island of Krakoa peacefully. Xavier even offers to deal with a nuclear-capable vessel being launched by the USA in return for Nimrod leaving the mutants alone. Now while Cyclops does try to stand against Xavier, it doesn't stop the Professor from actually taking control of the mind of a soldier on that nuclear ship and blowing it to complete smithereens, while Cyclops is forced to just watch it happen.